Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about a product that I have been using a lot lately and I thought it might be a good time to do a review. I'm often asked what I recommend for inexpensive paper and I've never been able to give a good answer. I have a few moderate priced recommendations and I have options for less expensive cotton papers, but budget papers are often not very good. If you're curious about the supplies that I recommend and the budget supplies that I love, I have links in the description box down below for you to check out. I also have my Patreon page listed for anyone who would like to check it out and see my real-time tutorials and other bonus content. A few months back, I was in need of replacing my inexpensive pad of paper. I generally go through these pretty quickly and I haven't had many that were worth repurchasing. I'm someone who likes to have an inexpensive paper option on hand for swatches, testing, experiments, and for practice paintings. I decided to try this one out because I'm already a fan of Fabriano's paper, and I liked that it had some cotton content in the paper since this is something you don't find very often with inexpensive paper options. Fabriano Studio Paper is a 140-pound watercolor paper. It has a 25% cotton content, is acid-free, and is available in cold press and hot press finish. My review will be for the cold press paper since that is my preference. This paper also comes in a few different pad sizes and with a couple different options for number of pages. I went with a 9x12 inch pad with 50 pages. My first impression was how substantial the pad was. Of course, it's a 50-sheet pad of paper, so it's going to be rather big, but it's a heavy, super thick pad of paper. The cardboard backing is super thick and sturdy, so much so that it wouldn't be required to use this pad at your desk or on a hard surface. I like to be able to curl up on my couch to paint and draw, so having a sturdy pad is great for times like that. It has a rather flimsy front cover that wraps around to the back. The front cover is not adhered to the spine, so it folds around to the back of the pad nicely, leaving a slight overhang on either side. The sheets are adhered to one side of the pad at the top, and it seems to be a pretty sturdy gummed binding, but still allows for the paper to come off cleanly each time. I've never had a paper rip or had any of the gum binding come off with the sheet. I have noticed that the gummed edge seems to be pretty rigid, so for ease of use, I use a utility knife to trim it every few sheets. I usually take the paper off at the beginning or end of a painting, so I can't speak to the holding power of the gum edge as a binding if you were to leave your sheets attached. However, I would feel pretty safe in saying that the paper would start to release from it fairly quickly. One thing I noticed as I looked at this paper for the first time was the texture. It has a surprisingly beautiful and pronounced cold press texture that you just don't see very often with inexpensive papers. The paper feels really nice and beautiful. To the touch, you can tell it feels different than wood pulp paper and has a thickness that you would expect from a 140-pound paper. This paper is really lovely when sketching directly onto it. The texture isn't too rough for drawing and it erases cleanly and easily without damaging the paper. It can handle pretty normal wear and tear with the sketching process. There is a limit to that though. If you are someone who makes a lot of mistakes when drawing, the paper starts to gray after 3 or 4 corrections if you are not gentle. If you are someone who sketches and erases gently and mindfully though, the paper can hold up for a bit longer. I found the painting experience to be surprisingly nice for the most part. I appreciated that I was able to pull out this paper and use it seamlessly for painting. I often find with inexpensive papers that there is an immediate step back in quality that can feel jarring and difficult to overcome. It's never fun to feel like you are fighting against your materials, so I was pleased that I could use this pad and it felt natural. I did expect this paper to feel a bit more luxurious when painting. Cotton papers have a distinct feel to them that's almost tactile. I wasn't expecting the same feel for this paper. I knew that it was only 25% cotton, but I did expect some of that beautiful texture and tactile feel to be evident in the painting process, and it just wasn't. In many ways, I have to say that it feels more similar to painting on a wood pulp paper. It's smoother than I expected when painting, but luckily the similarities to wood pulp paper end there. The colors show up beautifully on this paper. They are so bright and vibrant. The paint acts as you would expect on this paper, and I felt like the color shift was very minimal, allowing the colors to really shine. I didn't have to worry about the paint sinking into the paper, becoming dull, and I didn't have to worry about the paint sitting on top to be lifted too easily later on. It's just exactly what you would expect and want for a watercolor paper. It's becoming my favorite paper to do my paint swatches on, and there's almost no feeling of compromise. I can see the colors clearly and accurately. I can see the paint's unique characteristics, and I don't feel like the paint is being heavily influenced by the paper. The one thing that may not be great for some is that the paper texture does heavily influence your granulation pattern, and it likes to settle into the paper's texture, making it harder to see the granulation characteristics more clearly. This is why I also love using this paper for color mixing experiments and other tests, because the paint can still flow and interact as they normally would on cotton paper, but without the large price tag that can keep me from feeling a bit conservative. I'm more of a wet on dry painter who paints in lots of glazes, so keep that in mind as I talk about my painting experience throughout the rest of this review. I found this paper handled wet on wet washes quite well. Again, the paper allows the paint and pigments to act very naturally and predictably on the page. I also noticed that the paper didn't buckle the same way that some paper does. I found this paper handled wet on wet washes very well. Again, the paper allows for the paint and pigment to act very naturally and predictably on the page. I also noticed that the paper didn't buckle the way that some paper does, so I didn't have to worry about those irritating peaks and valleys that disrupted my results. For heavy washes, I have to say that I'm not someone who works in heavy washes very often, but the few times that I have, I noticed the paper did curve a bit. This could be easily fixed by taping your paper down. I found that this paper didn't fight me very hard and that I only needed a small amount of tape to keep the paper flat and I was good to go. I also noticed that it didn't have any warping or puckering that you can sometimes get with other papers. I was able to do a heavy wash and not have any distinct areas of water or pigment settling. I also appreciated that this paper dried nice and flat, so I didn't have to fight the paper throughout the rest of the painting process. Now for glazing, the be-all end-all characteristic that I need from my supplies. I glaze a lot, and it's usually in several layers or more easily, so I need my supplies to hold up to a lot of abuse. I often mention in my reviews that supplies are a very personal choice. How you paint and the techniques you use will heavily influence the kind of materials that you will like and use in your work. This paper did extremely well, even surpassing my own expectations. I'm able to glaze over and over again without issue. I didn't have to worry about the pigment sitting on top of the paper, lifting easily, and I didn't have to worry about the paper pilling. It just works, and I appreciate that. I have noticed that this paper does seem to have less of a color shift than some other papers, keeping the colors bright and vibrant. It does mean that sometimes I don't have to glaze as much as usual, but it also means that sometimes I have a color that remains a bit brighter than expected. I noticed that if you make a mistake, the colors are able to be lifted as you would expect. Some colors are easier than others, but that is based on the paint properties rather than the paint. If you are unsure about how your paints handle, I would always recommend testing them before working on an important painting. As I wrap up this review with some final thoughts, I wanted to mention that I know we've talked a lot about the swatching and experimenting capabilities of this paper, but let's not forget that it's also a solid option for painting. Most watercolor artists will tell you when you're first starting out that it's the paper that is most important, not the paint, and I have to say that I wholeheartedly agree. I won't say that I followed that advice when I first started out because I didn't. Buying beautiful paints is much more fun. However, it is solid advice that the paper will affect your experience more than any other supply. Since this is an acid-free paper with some cotton content, the paper will hold up well throughout the years as you display your artwork. Its ability to handle paint well means that you won't be held back in your painting process, and you won't have to worry about using high-quality paints only to have them dull after a significant color shift. I have been using this paper a lot over the last few months, both personally and professionally. It's been a great paper to have on hand as I've been making resources for my masterclass, swatching paints, creating demos, testing, and more. I've also been using this paper for painting and illustrations, and I have been really happy with how they've turned out. It's been a great way for me to work on paintings for my portfolio, for paintings I will just be scanning and using digitally, and also for working on new subjects. It doesn't feel like 100% cotton, but to assume it would is unfair. If you are someone who prefers 100% cotton, then this just isn't going to be the paper for you. However, if you want a budget paper that can handle watercolor paint and techniques well, then this is well worth looking into. I have to say that I have really enjoyed using this paper. I think it's a really great option for the price and is a really great guilt-free option to use while swatching, experimenting, and playing. I think beginner artists who are just getting into watercolor and want to try it before spending a ton of money will be really happy with this paper. Its ability to be a budget-friendly option that also allows for a more authentic watercolor experience is what makes this paper a perfect choice for all skill levels. I hope that you have enjoyed this review and found it helpful. If you did, I would love it if you would give it a like, leave a comment down below, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and even share this video with anyone who might find it helpful. If you appreciate this video and you would like to financially support my channel, then I have a Patreon page and a Ko-fi account linked down below. Your support is what allows me to continue creating videos and reviews. As an added bonus, Patreon supporters have access to extra perks like real-time tutorials, extra videos, behind-the-scenes content like paintings I don't share anywhere else, access to polls, and more. I want to thank my patrons for their support, and it means the world to me. That is all for this video, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye!